All right, back on Morning Line. Our guest is Professor Thomas Schwartz over at Vanderbilt, and we got some more calls, Professor. Let's take Ann next on line one. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning.
Hey.
Three things, and I'll be real quick. For one, Donald Trump this morning in his speech didn't treat again those that had been afflicted by the coronavirus with respect when he referred to it as the China flu. Nor did his family wear masks, but they put masks on their children, which was a clear indication they were concerned about the coronavirus in some way. Secondly, I'd like to know your opinion on the fact that McConnell, Schumer, Pelosi all attended Mass with the future president and vice president-elect this morning, which I think is a telltale sign of what will happen when the Senate goes back into session. And lastly, when it comes to the apprentice, they've already asked for him to resign from the SAG union, and in order to have his television show, he has to have a current SAG card, something I just happen to know a little bit about because my daughter happened to have one as well. And they want him to remove himself from the SAG union. So having another apprentice show won't be quite as easy for the Donald.
You may be right about that. You got to get the SAG card, but I think if there's money to be made and there's a producer behind him and he wants to do it, he'll probably find a way. And by the way, this is video from earlier today. This is the Marine One, which he took from the White House to Andrews Air Force Base before he boarded Air Force One, which as we speak is in the air right now on its way to Mar-a-Lago. So, yeah, he's on his way to Mar-a-Lago, and the president, Professor, would you want to comment a little on what she said there about who showed up and the like?
Of how the political leadership sees things is clearly they were with Joe Biden today. They went to Mass with him at the cathedral, and that basically that was a show of solidarity and a recognition that he was the new president and they were going to work with him and the rest. And so, yes, that was clear. And I was going to mention that point about the SAG card is that the Screen Actors Guild wants to expel Trump or at least prevent him from continuing his membership, and that might they would try to keep him from a recurring role on The Apprentice or a new Apprentice show. So that is going on. And I think the fact that the Trump family was there and their kids had masks on and they didn't is something of a telltale sign. Donald Trump's handling of the COVID pandemic, while it had some achievements in terms of the vaccine, as a symbolic element was a failure, I think, and his own downplaying of it, his behavior and the rest, I think, did hurt him politically and in the manner in which it was conducted.
All right, let's take another call. We've got Ed. Ed, good morning. Hi, Ed.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
Let me get this food out of my mouth. Okay. Hey, good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
I went back to take a look at the Constitution about impeachment, and there's nothing in there about an ex-president. I don't think they can try him because he's no longer in office. Now, they can go ahead and do it, but I don't think, and I think what he'll have to do is appeal to the Supreme Court because there's nothing. I went in there and looked at it, and there's nothing in there about a former president being impeached. And the procedure for this, trying somebody that's no longer in office, went back to William Blunt, who was a senator from Tennessee, and he got tied up with trying to get Tennessee in, to go along with being in the be with Spain, and so. But I just don't think legally they can try him. But it seems like now, when the man is down, everybody's jumping on him. And give yourself a couple of years, If you remember what Nixon was able to do after he had to leave office, he become one of an elderly senior statesman for the country. And so, anyway, Professor, I'd appreciate if you just would talk about the constitutionality of this.
You touched on it before, and you said there may be some legal question as to impeaching someone who's no longer in office. Keep in mind, everything's different about this president, from the way he behaved to the fact that he is the only president in U.S. history to be impeached twice. So I don't know if this is just uncharted territory.
It is. It is uncharted territory. Now, it is the case that the Congress has pursued a trial of figures who have resigned, but that has never been the case with the president. So what we're dealing with here is whether, and the caller was correct, the president might want to challenge this in the courts as to whether a trial could continue when he is no longer in office. There is a dispute among constitutional scholars, and it will probably have to be decided or determined to see whether it goes. And I think the reason for pursuing it is centrally the idea of keeping him from running again. And that's the major reason for wanting to do it, as well as, in a sense, to make a statement about his accountability for his role in the incitement of the rioters at the Capitol. On the other point that the caller made, it is interesting that Trump is actually leaving office with a higher popularity than George W. Bush. And we know that George W. Bush has rehabilitated himself to a great extent and has become somewhat of a senior statesman. And the caller was correct that Richard Nixon also did a great deal to rehabilitate himself. So it is interesting. Americans don't have very long memories, and they're often willing to entertain a second act from their politicians. Whether that happens with Donald Trump or not remains to be seen, but it certainly has happened in the past.
Oh, sure. You know, with time, you're right. A lot of things. And Richard Nixon became a statesman and the like. I just wonder, with regard to history books and it moves forward, I mean, it's fair to say that this president achieved some of his goals during his 4 years. He did. To say he did nothing is inaccurate. He did things, and he made some differences, and he did some good things. But I think the first thing that will come up, I believe, 25 years from now, when a student opens up a textbook or looks online in studying and they get to the Trump administration, the very first thing that will jump out is that he was the sitting president that had involvement with an insurrection at this. That is his legacy now, first and foremost. Like it or not, I don't know if you agree with me now, but that transcends anything else that happened, in his, good or bad, in his administration. Just transcends it. It's not even close.
Well, I think just as when textbooks are open, Richard Nixon, the usual thing is Watergate. I think that's probably likely that Trump will be associated with this awful event at the Capitol that he encouraged, and his unwillingness in that sense, which was breaking with tradition, to recognize the legitimacy of an election even after he had exhausted his legal remedies, and to encourage his supporters to try to do something unconstitutional. That will be, I think, something of a tarnish to whatever else he's done.
I do wonder what all his supporters think, who have been on the record saying we went there because he asked us to, and not a single one of them got a pardon. Let's go to Michael. Michael, good morning. Hi, Michael.
Oh, yes, Nick. I'd like to stay and talk to the gentleman here. I think we're setting a dangerous precedent with this impeachment. I understand what Trump done was wrong, was a supporter, then wasn't a supporter. But when you can streamline a impeachment in one day, I mean, the impeachments have always been, they go to committees, they go to the judiciary, they have debate. I mean, this is the way we have always impeached presidents. We knew Nixon had tapes and had done wrong, but he still got the legal, what I see, legal way of impeachment. It's dangerous when you can just say in one day, hey, he's got to go.
Well, but what are you saying? I mean, they didn't do it all in one day. I mean, they voted, and he's been impeached, and now the trial is something to convict him in the Senate. But I mean, it's funny too. People mix it all up. They say, well, how can he be impeached if it hasn't gone to the Senate? He's already impeached. Okay.
Oh, I know. That's what I'm saying. That's the danger of it. He was impeached in one day. It happened on the Monday that they come back. Boom. We vote to impeach. And I think, impeachments have always been going to judiciary committees. They've always had the debates. It's just the way we've always impeached presidents. This is the very first president that has been impeached.
Do you want to talk on that? It was the second time around more fast. I hear what he's saying now. I mean, it seemed like it came fairly quickly. But I want to remind everyone, when we say this is the way we always done it, nothing was done the way it was always done under this president, okay? Across the board. So clinging to certain traditions and not others, let's just face it. Everything was off the rails, okay, for better or for worse. Go ahead, though. Is that fair to say that's a concern that went so quickly? Should there have been more time spent debating it?
There has been some pushback on this idea that there should have been a lengthier procedure. Clearly, the politics and the outrage was there, and the feeling that Trump's guilt was so self-evident given the speech he had given. But yes, obviously, feelings were running very high, and so the issue was pushed fast in the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi had it set up fairly quickly, and they did move fast. There's no question that compared to past elements of impeachment and the rest, that it was very quickly done. Whether that's good or bad, the idea was to make sure that the president could not do anything more damaging to the country in the time. And in some ways, perhaps that speedy impeachment sort of chastened Trump and prevented him from any more actions that might have caused harm. So that was, I think, the logic.
Yeah, and I can understand it. I truly can. Remind folks what he was impeached for the first time, which was a very, very different thing than an insurrection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was impeached initially because of the notion that in a phone call with the Ukrainian president, he had basically tried to gain that Ukrainian president's help in dealing with his political rival, Joe Biden, and getting dirt on Biden and this sort of thing, this type of bargaining with a foreign leader for domestic political advantage, and that was seen as corrupt. But that had to go through a process of argument over what Trump had said, what deals were made, and so there was a great deal of debate over it. And in the end, the impeachment ended up being strictly partisan, and Trump was acquitted in the Senate. But I know it does seem like ages ago, but it was only last year that took place. And so that element, yeah.
It's real interesting to me because you talk about that. I don't know about this, but it seems like from the very beginning, and as we go back to before the presidential election and think of all the Democratic candidates that were running and the names in the mix, and early on, who knew about Biden, but for whatever reason, it seems like from the very beginning, going way back, Donald Trump zeroed in on the fact that the only person that seemed to really have a chance at beating him in his mind was Joe Biden, because that's who he went after. It's interesting that for whatever, and there were some other very qualified candidates, and we all know it could have been someone else, Bernie Sanders, or, I mean, there's a bunch. But for whatever reason, Donald Trump decided way early on that Joe Biden was the greatest threat to his presidency. Would you agree? And I wonder what made him think that. Because there was a time people were like, Joe's a good guy, but he's ran before and he's so old, let's get someone new. I mean, even among the Democrats, you were thinking, I don't know about this. But Trump clearly felt it was Biden all the way, and he was right.
He was right. The polling, at least some of the polling, did indicate that. And I think the reason for that is that Joe Biden was seen as someone who would bring back a type of normalcy to American politics, that he had a reputation as a compromiser, a moderate within the Democratic Party, and most of his rivals within the party, particularly his most serious rival, Bernie Sanders, was seen as too far left for most of the American people, and that because of that, Biden, for the most part, was seen as a way of continuing the Obama-Biden era, which was very popular among Democrats. Biden had had entertained the thought of running in 2016 and didn't, at least he said, because of his son's death, that he decided not to run then. So Biden, I think, as a continuation of the Obama period, which is very, very popular among Democrats in general, was always the strongest candidate, and Trump recognized that Biden had the potential, as being very different from him, at being able to beat him.
This just in, by the way, Professor, we talk about the traditions, many of which it seemed the president just chose to ignore. But they are now reporting that indeed President Trump did follow the tradition and left a note in the Oval Office for Joe Biden, which is a tradition, and there again is the state capitol, or the U.S. Capitol rather, but he left a note. Talk a bit about that, because I know that I think there was some reference to the note that Obama had left for President Trump, and that no one knew if the president was going to do this for Biden. And of course, you've got to wonder what's in there. I'm curious, do the contents of those letters ever get public, or do they ever share them, or have they been shared, portions of them?
Yes. In particular, of course, the one that comes to my mind is the one that George H.W. Bush left for Bill Clinton. And that was also a very bitter campaign. And George H.W. only had one term in office, and he was crushed by his defeat by Bill Clinton. But he left a very, very conciliatory letter that always moved Bill Clinton, and that effectively also provided the basis for their subsequent friendship, which took shape in the 2000s, when both of them did a lot of international travel and work on behalf of the United States together. So that is an older tradition, but it is one that I think I'm glad to hear Trump did it. I hope that what he said was conciliatory, but that is a tradition that I think is valuable.
And can the president the incoming president who receives the letter, and I know in the past little excerpts sometimes have been shared, it's up to Biden if he wants to share what President Trump left him in the letter, correct? I mean, it's, oftentimes maybe it's kept private, but who knows, maybe he'll share what it was. It's just interesting to me that, President Trump this morning in his goodbye speech did not mention Biden, has not mentioned him once, did say good luck, to the administration, but kind of claimed if it does a good job, it's going to be because of what I did, and that he leaves a note. It's kind of interesting to me that he can't even bring himself to say Biden's name, and yet he's left a note. I almost wonder if that note may not be all that positive. Who knows? I'd love to see what it says, though. But anyway, that's just breaking news now. He did leave a note, so that's one tradition that this president, at least on inaugural day, decided to follow. All right, we'll take a break and be back with our final segment with our guest right after this.